You had a job that you quit so you could start your own hustle, teaching people how to raise millions of dollars. What inspired you to make that change?
Yeah, so that's a you want the long answer or the short answer?
Let's do the short one.
Okay. Basically, short answer was I realized that there was I think a gap in the market in terms of like I realized that most nonprofits did not understand the importance of going to see their donors face to face. And even if they did understand the importance, they didn't know how to do it. And became pretty obvious to me that there was a big opportunity for me to assist people with that. And so, yeah, through a number of things, just I had started out doing this part time on the side because when I was working in a nonprofit raising money, uh, I had a lot of organizations reach out to me offering to hire me to go work for them, but I really felt called to the work we were doing. And so I always said no. And then one time I was like, you know what? The next time somebody offers that, I'm still going to say no, but I'm also going to offer, but I will teach you how to do it. And that's kind of how my business got started, and it just really picked up and went full time about four years ago now.
How's it been? Was it worth it?
Oh yeah, one of the best decisions of my life.
Why? Why is that?
Well, it was providential, certainly in a number of ways, but right around the time that I decided to make this transition. So my wife and I, we had one daughter at the time, and my wife was pregnant with our second daughter when I made the transition to doing this full time. And then our second daughter was born. And then about 9 months later, we found out my wife was pregnant with twins. And then so we wound up having, when our twins were born, we had four daughters, 3 years old and younger. And
Congrats,
being
dude.
able to own my own business at that time, work a lot fewer hours, and make a lot more money was very, very helpful.
Dude, that's the way to do it, man. Work fewer hours, make more money, spend more time with the family. Why doesn't everyone just do that? I guess out of
I
fear, maybe.
well, it's funny. I I realize there's unique realities to me and things I've been, blessed with, but at the same time, that is a question that I think it is important one to ask. You can ask it in kind of a silly way, like, why doesn't everyone just not work a lot and make a bunch of money? But there is also a question to seriously ask of like, is there a way I could work less and make more money? And that's stuff that I really did wrestle with a lot. And it's like why to this day I only work 4 days a week. It's like I don't work on Mondays. And even when I do work, I work less than a normal like full day, and I'm able to go home and have lunch with with our daughters and give my wife a break in the middle of the day and stuff like that. And I think just assuming that things have to be a certain way is easy to do, but doing some of the hard thinking of like, how could I, achieve X in, Y particular way leads to some pretty creative solutions.
Let's emphasize that to our virtuous leaders. So don't be stuck in the box doing what everyone else is doing. Think creatively and reflect on, why am I doing this? Can I do it a different way? And then take the plunge. I love it.
Yeah, exactly.
So how do I raise millions of dollars?
Hmm. Well, that's a good question. I would say uh, maybe this might seem simplistic, but I would say the first thing is you need a case that requires millions of dollars. So not every organization needs to raise, a ton of money, but one of the biggest obstacles a lot of organizations face is they simply think like, well, we do good stuff, people should give us money. And it's like maybe to some degree, but a lot of times what inspires like the biggest gifts is people seeing a really bold and exciting vision that they want to make a reality. And so I think So that's part of it, is you need to start with a vision that people want to make a reality. You need to have a cost associated with achieving that vision and a timeline to get it done. And I would say some of that is kind of foundational at all times. But even some organizations get that right, but they miss the biggest thing, in my opinion, which is that the most effective fundraising is not about what we tell donors, but what we're able to have a donor reveal to us. So, like, I would say, like, uh, basic fundraising is telling things to donors and then asking them to give us money. But great fundraising is asking good questions and listening. I mean, I'm curious, in your line of work. Sometimes I analogize effective major gift fundraising to therapy in some ways, because a lot of the best results come from just asking questions and having the person on the other side of the table do most of the talking. Because if you can get the donor to tell you, like, if somebody gives a $5,000 gift to an organization, and you sit down with them and start asking them about, what caused them to do that, what is it about our organization that has caused you to be so generous? And they tell you, well, they tell you something about their grandmother and some little tidbit about how the role she played in their life. And then you can ask more about, like, well, like, tell me about grandma. Like, what was her name? And then we start hearing more and more stories, and you can uncover these things that are foundational to this person's existence. And when you understand that, and maybe even more importantly, when you can get the donor to verbalize that to you, that almost helps them do all of the convincing that this particular project, if it lines up with what they're passionate about, is something that's going to be deeply fulfilling to them.
That's awesome, man. It reminds me of the Chris Voss Black Swan approach, where it's not a fight where you're trying to, like, wrestle this cash out of this guy's hand, but it's, "Ooh, look, help me understand what you're interested in, what you want to get, what you want to get, and then let's see if we line up. Like, this is what I do." So and
Exactly.
you made the analogy to therapy exactly. We look at therapy or any sort of conversation where you're trying to help someone else in three stages.
Mhm.
Most people jump to the third stage, which is the biggest mistake without the third stage is getting practical, making the ask, if you will. But
Yeah.
before that, first we want to lay the foundation of understanding the other person, and then encouragement in the therapy context, like helping them to foster the attitude of receptivity.
Right.
So,
Yeah, but I mean, yeah, it's the same thing. It's like, if you sit down with someone, you might know, especially as as a therapist, you might know what the right next move is. But if you just sit down and just, like, okay, I have diagnosed you in 2 minutes, and now I'm going to yell at you to do the right thing. Like, that's not going to
right.
work. And same thing in a fundraising situation. You might know that it's a good thing for a donor to support something, but if you just start lecturing them and telling them, like, look, you really need to do this because that, like, you've been given all this money, and it would be a shame if you didn't use it. Like, no one wants to be told what to do. And if it's forced upon people, especially people who do have a lot of money, it's like one of the worst things you can possibly do is try to strong arm them into a position. So yeah, I think, and it's also interesting, some of my most successful uh, fundraising clients have a psychology background, which I've thought
Hmm.
is interesting, because it doesn't surprise me at all that they understand that it's a lot about listening.
So I'd be curious to know what your vision is now, because I know you have a podcast you're recording in your studio now. What role does that play? What are the other initiatives you have in mind? Where do you want to take this thing?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, primarily my focus with the business, I'm intentionally a one man show. I don't have employees, and I don't plan on ever having a team of consultants, even though I could. But a huge part of that is, at least for the time being, my focus is providing a great life for my family,
Yeah.
and allowing my business to obviously do a lot of good in the world, but also uh, allow me to spend time with my kids and my wife, and like, you know, allow us to go on trips and spend time together and prioritize, like, you know what, we're never going to get these days back. And so right now I have less of a uh I don't know, worldly ambition of building some big team or making some giant impact. For now it's like doing what I can in the time that I have, that allows me to, I don't know, spend the most time with my family. But practically speaking, the majority of my time is spent coaching CEOs of primarily Catholic and pro-life organizations on how to do this type of thing with their top donors. And then the big projects kind of coming up. There's several things that are ongoing. The podcast, I have an online training program, stuff like that. But the big thing in the works now is I'm in the process of writing a book that is really focused on helping all major gift fundraisers understand not only the how to of, you know, how to raise money effectively, but also what I believe is the mindset of the most effective fundraisers. And yeah, it's going to have a lot of stories, and I really just hope to provide to people what I had to kind of piece together when I was getting started out, because I think there are so many people and so many organizations that could raise a lot more money. They're just not quite sure what the path is.
What is that mindset?
I believe essentially it is being obsessed with whatever that vision is that you're trying to make a reality. I think, you know, all of the greatest, you know, is one of the things I think about. Uh, I'm not sure everything that I'm going to include in the book, and one day I'd be curious to get your take on this. Is like just how Catholic to make the book, because a lot of my audience is not. They're not Catholic. They're not Christian. I've got, you know, people all over the world that follow my stuff, and but one of the primary examples I think a lot of is that was Rob Hayes that just you saw in the mirror briefly. One of the
Former
primary
guest.
examples, indeed, is the North American martyrs. And I think about, you know, I believe it was St. Isaac Jogues who he was visiting with uh, the natives, and he was tortured horrifically. They, you know, cut his face up with oyster shells. They chewed off his fingers, all this horrific stuff. And eventually he escaped and made it back to, I believe it was France, where his, you know, house of Jesuits was. And they didn't even recognize him when he made it back there. They were like, who is this man who they had spent years of their lives with? They couldn't tell that it was him because he was so disfigured. And he even had to receive a special dispensation to say the mass because his hands were so disfigured. And he decided he was going to go back to North America to continue his missionary work. And shortly after he returned, he was captured and killed and martyred for the faith. And like that guy was obsessed. He was completely obsessed with reaching people who needed the gospel and bringing it to them, no matter the costs. And I think all of the greatest fundraisers have a similar disposition, maybe not quite as intense. And there's certainly, you know, seasons of your life that there's different obligations, but anyone who is raising money because it's a job and they'll go take another one for a $10,000 pay increase is not even remotely in the same category as someone who is obsessed with making a particular vision a reality. And I want to kind of highlight stories of fundraisers that share that mindset, and also I think unpack how you can live that in a way that's not you know, detrimental to your family and your primary vocation.
That's what a good fundraiser Isaac Jogues would have made.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like if you if you're willing to die or get your fingers chewed off, like you could ask somebody for $1 million.
So two highlights from what you said: the vision,
Mhm.
totally on board with that, buying into that vision, being obsessed with it. But then, man, I love what you. And this is what is indicative of virtuous leaders. Priorities, family comes first. I mean, that's really your biggest vision that you're obsessed with, right? And
Yeah.
everything else pales in comparison.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and it's yeah, who knows? I mean, there's a lot of things we could discuss in this podcast, but I think part of that is like my mom had she suffered a massive stroke when I was like 8 years old and almost died. And she was, completely paralyzed on the right side of her body for several weeks and received
Wow.
anointing of the sick and all that. And she wound up being miraculously healed. Long story, but it involved the Blessed Francis Xavier Sealos. There was a first class relic of him that was brought to her in the hospital. And then she also uh, did a spiritual communion while she was watching the mass on TV. And at the final blessing, so she's completely paralyzed on the right side of her body. She does a spiritual communion. And then at the final blessing, out of instinct, she went to make the sign of the cross and she could, and she was
Wow.
perfectly fine. So,
Wow. Amazing.
that combined with like my dad's dad passed away when my dad was 8 years old. So like I've always had these I don't know, these examples of like life is fleeting and uh who knows, like I might not be here for a full 90-year existence. And even if I am, I would yeah, there's a realness to like life is limited and I don't know, I want to make the most of it with our family.
Kevin, you have a crazy story. So this is about truth speakers who follow their ideals no matter what the cost. And you have paid that cost in your own life. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it's yeah, it's funny. I haven't shared this story publicly before, and I'll intentionally be vague because I part of me understands their position and I don't want to you know, I don't want to go on the offensive against this organization. But here, so I'll be a little bit vague. But basically, so I've got a podcast that, is focused on major gift fundraising. And uh it's surprisingly enough, at least at the time of this happened, was the number one major gift fundraising podcast in the world, which is a very niche of a niche, but it certainly has some level of influence. And there was a company serving nonprofits. This is a large private equity backed organization that has I think close to 100,000 customers, and they wanted to they were going to pay me well, I was saying they were going to pay me $15,000 to be able to list my podcast on their website. And then I was going to have to put like a tiny little 2-second thing at the beginning of my podcast mentioning their company essentially. And so this seemed like a no-brainer. It was a good company, something I like, seemed like a decent enough product, trusted by a lot of organizations. So and then also they were going to promote me to their giant list of customers, which was much more valuable than the initial $15,000 investment. And that was just to put it on their website for a year. But and this was the year I was making the transition to running my business full time. So this was like a sweet opportunity for me. And I was super excited about it. And then they found out that I used to work for a pro-life organization. And I don't hide the fact that I do, but I also don't like, I don't shout it from the rooftops every time I begin a conversation, but it's on my LinkedIn. You can find it. It's not hard to find. And so they see this, they tell me they want to have this meeting. We have this meeting, and I thought it was a good conversation. They were like, look, we're a big company. Essentially half of our team doesn't like this. Half of our team is fine with it, but they wanted me to kind of understand a little bit more about you. And essentially, are you going to turn your podcast into some like, full on right wing extremist whatever? Or I think that was their fear. And I was like, no, like it's a fundraising podcast. I'll I'll certainly have guests on that are Catholic and pro-life and stuff like that, but it's not the point of the podcast. And they're like, okay, cool. And so we had the conversation. They were like, yeah, we're good with this. Let's move forward. And I was like, I actually really appreciated that we were able to have that conversation and come to an understanding moving forward. But then it was like that conversation was maybe on a Friday. Forgive me, this was years ago. That conversation was maybe on a Friday, and then the deal was supposed to go through the next week, and then that next week on the Monday or something, Roe v. Wade was overturned, and they just contacted me and said, "Hey, we're out." And they pulled the plug on the deal. And one of the funniest things about it was the guy who was having the meeting with me called me to give me the news, and I was just telling him like, hey man, like I totally get it, like I wish we could have gone through. I thought it was really great how we could have two organizations on like a different side of an issue, but we were able to like talk about it and come to an agreement. Like I was super excited about that. So I'm definitely bummed out that it didn't work, but I understand y'all's position. It would certainly, like, you definitely could get heat for being associated with someone like me. And so that was my attitude, and that's what I told him. And he was like, man, this makes it even worse. I thought you were at least going to be mad or something. And he's like, you just seem like such a good guy. And so, yeah, that's probably my only experience with like, I've certainly experienced other things, but that was one of the most like, you are losing money because of your, belief.
So you didn't tell him that his decision was motivated by the forces of Satan?
I was thinking that I would schedule a free session with my favorite therapist to to tell him that.
Man, and you don't want to oust these people publicly, huh? You don't want to introduce some reputational damage here for them.
Oh no, I
Uh,
don't.
okay, you're too nice, man.
And yeah, I mean that's funny. So it's actually yes. One of the things I would like to talk to you about at some point
Sure.
uh, is, yeah, I've gone back and forth on this because there is a way that I could have used that as an opportunity to, like, you know, go after their business and tell everybody like these are the, like I could turn it into a public uh you know
Shaming?
public shaming that ultimately leads to more business from me, from
Nothing like a good public
people.
shaming.
Exactly. And so, yeah, that's always been an interest of mine, is like, where is that line of like, sometimes it's good to call people out, but also there's something just horrible about the online hate that is spewed back and forth. And part of me just doesn't want to get involved at all. But then it's also like, well, I was involved because this
Mhm.
happened to me. So I don't know. It's a big question on my mind.
Well, let's think through that together, because that is also something that I've wrestled with, and I don't have all the answers, but we can maybe think through it together.
Yeah.
So, one consideration here is, uh, I mean, first it involves values clarification for yourself, which I think you've done that. And then I think, what is our role in society for a just society? And I think the minimum is not lying, right?
Mm,
Is not compromising our values. So, for example, I think using so-called preferred pronouns, I think that would be a lie, or at least deceptive enough to where it's a contradiction of values. So I would never use someone's preferred pronouns. Um, but then it's, well, to what extent do I have the obligation to speak the truth when I'm not being asked for it?
mm,
And the way I think about this is, we have certain rights in our country. We have the right to free speech, but we only have that right if we exercise it. If we don't exercise that right, then we don't have it in practice. So people say like, "Oh yeah, you have the right to say whatever you want," but no, you don't, because you're too scared to say it. You're actually too scared to say, then
Yeah.
there's only male and female. You're too scared to say that racism is not one of the top 10 or maybe even top 100 issues in this country, that it was fabricated by these Marxists as a way of producing enmity between us so that we don't pay attention to the greater issues. For example, poverty, which is why likely the intelligence community assassinated Martin Luther King Jr. is because he was talking about poverty, not about
Yeah.
race. And then you go into, I mean, you can watch the Uncle Tom documentaries. They're very good on this. So if we're not speaking the truth, then we don't have the right to free speech in practice. And if we don't have the right to it in practice, we're going to lose the right to it even in theory, because
Yeah.
culture has the force of law. It's going to change. So the way I personally see it is, look, we have one life. There's a lot at stake here. The world is not a good place, and it never has been since the fall of Adam and Eve in the garden. And what are we going to be proud of looking back on it on the other side of this life? It's going to be making the biggest positive impact we can. So
Yeah.
I made the decision when launching Values First Therapy. I'm just going to speak the truth. I'm not going to hide anything. I'm just going to go for it, and I'm going to look forward to being canceled. And
Yeah.
like you alluded to, yeah, that actually creates more opportunities. You meet more interesting people, and you live with freedom and peace and a
Yeah.
good conscience.
Yeah.
So I think where you're at in your stage, it's this. Okay, to what extent do I want to go all out and just like cut those threads? It's a prudential judgment. I'm not sure if every single person has to do that, has to just like cut every single thread. I'm just going to say whatever comes to my mind, whatever I think is good to say, regardless. Some people talk about so-called exit velocity, that you have a certain trajectory of growth, and there's a certain point where you can afford being canceled because you're popular enough. Um, that's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is you actually get more popular by being canceled. So it's actually the best opportunity. That's how Jordan
Right.
Peterson got famous, is during the Kathy Newman interview, when which he received a lot of criticism for, but that's what catapulted him. Um, so
Yeah.
another way to look at it is like, what do you have to lose? Which, if you're a solopreneur, maybe nothing. So I'll wrap up so you can comment. But we can kind of there's this like tantalizing temptation, alluding to the mythology of Tantalus, of this thing, these like grapes just out of reach. And as a solopreneur, well, there's these big clients, and if I just like toe the party line, then maybe I can get to some of those clients, and maybe you can, but part of it is just an illusion. And if we just unleash ourselves and just really be who we are, yeah, we may not get client A, but we'll get client B, C, D, and E. That's my way of looking at it. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. So I think, yeah, my reasoning to not go after them doesn't have anything to do with like trying to get other business like that. And in fact, I actually made a decision. It's like one of the things on my podcast now is there are no sponsors allowed. Like, you can't sponsor the show, because I don't want anyone to have any influence over my what I want to say one way or the other, essentially. And like my primary revenue model has nothing to do with the online world, essentially. It's all like referral based business through existing clients primarily. And so, yeah, so I think more of my concern is just like, what's the best thing for helping fundraisers, essentially. And so I don't know, I'll give you one example of I think this will be interesting to you and your listeners, as well as me going the opposite direction and taking like a very bold public position on things, which was when I was at Heroic Media, the nonprofit I worked for. Our founder learned that Planned Parenthood was having awards luncheons in major cities across the country, and they were having one here in Dallas. And he had the idea to have an event at the same time as their event. And so he had the idea, and then I essentially was tasked with like making this happen the first year. And I added to the idea, not only are we having an event at the same time, but we're going to outraise them. So they had raised like $700,000 the previous year. We decided to put out a goal. We're going to raise $1 million. We're going to beat Planned Parenthood. Same time, same day. We're going head to head. Like, don't be a loser. If you're pro-life, you need to show up to this thing and give big. And we were a tiny organization that had never raised anything like that at an event. Our previous best event had raised $100,000. So I put out the goal of $1 million. The first year we did 372,000. The next year we did 700. It took 5 years, but we finally beat Planned Parenthood. We raised
Nice.
right around 1.9 million, and we had 3,000 people in the room.
That's
This was
awesome, man.
like
Killing
this,
it.
people were, it was highly motivating, and super successful. And so I don't know what that means exactly, but it's an interesting thing that's kind of in my background, and I don't know, something I'm considering.
Yeah, you know what? Let me add a little bit of nuance to my previous statement, because the other thing is, well, to what extent are my values relevant to what I'm actually talking about? And in your case, maybe they're not super relevant. Whereas in my case, in a therapy practice, they are.
Right.
Uh, so it's like, why would you unnecessarily isolate people um, who could be doing good in other areas, possibly?
Exactly.
Uh,
Yeah, I'm glad you're putting words to some of my thinking, because like I think what I would say is, like, there are a lot of fundraisers who I would say, like, they're doing very good work for a particular mission, like feeding the hungry, for instance. And it's like, they're doing really good work. And if I come out on LinkedIn with some just like super hardcore, like, stance that has absolutely nothing to do with fundraising, but will certainly make these people think this guy sucks, let's never listen to him. Like, I'm not sure. I can see it both ways. Like, I agree with you that, like, you shouldn't hide your values, and there's something freeing in that. But it's also like, there does seem something wrong about unnecessarily alienating people, especially when they don't actually know you. Like, a lot of these people think of, like, if it was a human that was sitting across from me and we could have a discussion about, like, this is what I believe, this is what you believe, like, we disagree, but we both realize we're not like evil people here. There's something productive to that conversation, but I think there's something unproductive just about, like, you all suck and we're on opposite teams over here.
Yeah, and I think the experience you had with that satanic organization that you didn't name is compelling here. That he said that, hey, you seem like a nice guy. So maybe
Yeah.
maybe you convinced, maybe you brought him one step closer to at least empathize with your viewpoint, which you wouldn't if he never talked to you to begin with.
Yeah,
So
and it's funny. He even that's one of the things he actually said, was like something
wow,
along those lines.
wow, okay.
Like, I don't remember if he didn't reveal his cards, which makes me think he was probably pro-choice, but he said something along the lines of, like, either he himself or other people were like, yeah, like it's good to see someone who is on the other side of the fence, but is like a really reasonable, like, obviously caring person. Um, and so I don't know. I don't know what that means, but I think that's part of the life of a virtuous leader, is just considering these things, and uh I don't know, wrestling with them, because it's not all like cut and dry, super easy decisions.
And I wonder if part of it is influenced by one's personality, and should be, that yeah, you are a nice, easygoing guy that can get along with different people, and that's a good witness. Whereas, like, I don't know if I would have the patience, man, to just put up with that. So for me, it's like I don't even want to. I don't even want to pretend like, or even to like, use the mental energy to think about what I'm not supposed to say around this guy. I've done that for years in grad school, and it's like I'm done with it, man. So maybe
Yeah,
it's
and
part of
maybe
like a
that's
personality thing.
yeah, yeah. It could also be, experience based because like most of my life is spent surrounded by like good Catholics, good Christians, just like trying to live a virtuous life, and sharing many of the ideals that we do. Whereas like you were in the lion's den for all these years, just like surrounded by craziness, and so maybe you've got more of a innate rejection of that
Yeah.
kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think that's right. Well, thanks for sharing that. First time you heard it live. So I think our audience will appreciate that.
I hope they do, and maybe one day you'll convince me to they were gonna pay me 15,000, so now I spent 15,000 on paid media to destroy their brand.
That's great.
Uh,
Well, it was great chatting with you, man.
yeah, thanks for having me. This is awesome, and look forward to staying in touch.
Yeah, if I go up to Dallas, I'll let you know.
Yeah, let's do it.
Take care again.
You too.